Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a Shimmerz Paints layout for you. To make this layout, I use the April Color Kitz collection. The kit includes Shimmerz Paints, pattern papers, embellishments, and also access to a cut file. And this month, this beautiful floral cut file was really fun to work with. You could see that I cut out many flowers using the cut file in all different sizes. At the top of my mat are some pink flowers. I did assemble those, but I didn't end up using them on this layout. So I'm just going to show you how I made the flowers that I did end up using on the layout. And I'm preparing those right now. These flowers are daisies, so I wanted the petals to be white and then the centers to be yellow. So I used two different Shimmerz paints. I used a Coloringz called Sunny Side Up that was included in this month's kit. And then I also use a Shimmerz that's called Bumbly Bee. We got that in one of the previous kits not too long ago. I use both of those paints to color the papers that are going to go in the center of the flowers. I use the slightly lighter color, which is the Sunny Side Up on the larger pieces, and then I use the Bumbly Bee on the smaller pieces. Even though both colors are bright and yellow, I thought that the slightly darker color should go in the center because I think that's the darkest part of the flower. And then I also added some jewels. I used these Queen & Company jewels that I had in my stash. They've been in my stash for a really long time, and the color went so nicely, so I decided that I was going to put one in the center of all of the flowers. I don't think it was necessary, but I really like jewels, and so I thought that this would add a nice little touch to them. And then after everything was dry, I ruffled all the petals up so that they would look a little bit more realistic. These leaves are also part of the cut file. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do with the flowers at this point, but I knew that I would want to have some leaves. So I used the Sunny Side Up yellow color again, and I also used a number of different green colors that I had in my stash. I used a Vibes called Beach Glass. I also use a Vibes called Green Tide Monster and a Spritz called Bamboo Leaf. I don't want all of the leaves to be just one flat color. I want there to be some different colors of green on the leaves. So I put the colors down on my mat. I added some water and then I dipped the leaves into the colors. In some cases, I went back and added a little bit more color with my paintbrush. If I liked the way the leaf came when I dipped it into the paint, I just left it the way it was. And I just keep adding color until I'm happy with the results. Now I have a silhouette cameo that cuts really well and I have no trouble with it. But for a very long time, I had one that would either cut out just fine or it would make a mess of my paper. And I went through so much white cardstock, I can't even tell you. So I began looking around for a more affordable alternative than using white scrapbooking paper. And I found that I could buy paper in 12 by 18 inch sheets. It's meant for office supply purposes, but it works perfectly for die cutting on my electronic die cutter or for using with metal dies. And it also works really well with all of my Shimmerz paints. So that's the paper that I'm using in case you were wondering. I made a long story out of that, but it's very economical and the quality is quite good. Now I added lots of color to my leaves and you can see that I have a lot of color still out on my mat. So I had some more die cut leaves that I didn't think I would need for this layout, and I decided I was going to add some color to those so I didn't waste any of my Shimmerz paints. So after I was done with the leaves, I allowed those to dry, and now I'm working on the rest of the layout. I'm making a border for around the outside of my layout using this beautiful blue ombre paper. If you've watched my channel for a while, you probably saw me make a frame before. I like to make a frame out of strips of paper to go around the outside edge of the layout. I'll do this when I don't have a whole 12 by 12 inch paper to gut. So I cut 1 inch strips. I have solid strips going vertically on either side of the layout, and then along the top and the bottom I have strips of paper that I cut at 45-degree angles on either side, and I'm going to assemble all 4 of these papers to make a frame. Earlier I used just a little touch of Distress Oxide in shaded lilac to ink those angles of the frame. Whenever I'm destashing 12 by 12 inch paper, before I get rid of the paper, I always look to see which of the papers are a nice weight, and then I save those papers so that I could use them for purposes like these, where I want to mount elements to a 12 by 12 inch paper, but I don't want to use a good piece of paper because the whole thing is going to get covered up. So I have quite a pile of those papers, and I do use them quite a bit. I finally decided what I wanted to do with this layout. I'm going to use this gorgeous black and white striped paper, and I'm going to use that in the background, and I'm going to make a wreath of the flowers that I just created on top of it. I wanted to have a very thin border of black paper all around the outside of the pattern paper. So I'm using a piece of black cardstock from my stash, and you can see I just left a very, very thin border all around it, but I think that that makes a big difference as far as having the paper contrast with the blue paper that's behind it. I didn't plan out exactly what I was going to do with these flowers, so I made them a whole bunch of different sizes. I'm not sure if I would have made them such different sizes if I knew I was creating a wreath. And I thought I made so many flowers, but I end up using all of the flowers to create this layout. Actually, I think there was 1 flower left over, but I was surprised at how many I fit onto this 1 page. I first spread out the 3 largest flowers, and then I worked the medium and the small flowers in between the larger ones. And I did spend a little bit of time arranging the flowers until I was happy with the way that they looked. And then I used my ATG gun and I attached all the flowers down. I didn't want to lose the placement of the flowers. I didn't want to put too much adhesive down though, because I will usually adjust things, especially on a wreath, because sometimes when I first put them down, they might be a little wonky, and I really want to make sure with a wreath that they look like they're in a circle. This is the photo that I'm going to use. This is a picture of my 2 daughters taken several years ago. I love the photos that I took on this day. I really am enjoying scrapbooking them. And I'm mounting the photo on the same paper that I used for the frame around the outside of the layout. I once again used the shaded lilac to ink the edges. On the bottom of my mat, there are some flowers that I fussy cut out from one of the pattern papers. I have some light purple lilac colored flowers, and then I also have a number of yellow flowers. I thought these would be a nice complement to the daisies that I have on my layout, and I'm inking the edges using the shaded lilac and the fossilized amber Distress Oxides. I also fussy cut some leaves. I'm inking the edges of all of those little tiny leaves with some Distress Oxide in Mowed Lawn. And I'm definitely inking my fingers along with the edges of those leaves. Now it's time to add the photo to the layout. Before I attach it down, I add some fun foam to the back just to give it a little bit of dimension. I like to use the fun foam that's adhesive on one side. I'm using some ATG adhesive to attach it down. I always like to mention that I will have to go back and add some wet glue to attach it down permanently, but first I just want to make sure that I'm happy with the arrangement of everything on the layout. I decided that I wanted the flowers to overlap the photo, so I lifted up some of the flowers and layered them on top of my picture. And I was really happy with the way those yellow and white daisies looked against that black and white striped paper in the background. I thought it was a nice contrast. Now I'm adding those little fussy cut flowers. I started off with the yellow ones, and then I added in the blue flowers, and I spent a little bit of time arranging them. I wanted to have little clusters of 2 or 3 flowers, and I really like the way these small flowers look next to the big flowers. I always like those differences in scale in the elements that I have on my layouts. If I have a lot of really large elements, I want to make sure that I include some tiny ones as well somewhere on the layout. And once I made my little clusters, I decided that I should just attach those down right away, just like I did with the big flowers. That way there's no chance that they're going to either get lost or they're going to shift. I can't tell you how often I'll be sitting in the same place. I don't move at all, and I'll lose things, especially little embellishments like these. So I went around the layout and I made sure they were all attached down. Now I'm using some of the embellishments that were in the kit. The one on the left says happiness, and then the one on the right says perfect. I thought those were great sayings for this photo, and then they also matched in so nicely with the color scheme on my page. I also added 2 bees. One of them is one of the dots that's in the upper left-hand corner. I really like the dots. I love the way they're nice and shiny, and I think that's a perfect image to use on this wreath. And then I tried to balance it off with a smaller die cut bee on the lower right hand corner. I added some of the fussy cut leaves to those little tiny floral clusters, and now I'm working on my larger leaves. So I inked the edges of all of the leaves with some Distress Oxide. I used the color Maude Lawn for that. Now I'm adding some gloss gel medium to each of the leaves. I stumbled across this technique a while back and I tried it out, and I love the way adding the gel medium helps to make the leaves look a little glossy, which I like. I think that it makes the leaves look realistic, and I also like the way it brings out the vibrant colors. Before I add those leaves to the layout, I added a little sentiment that says "so much fun." I don't end up leaving that on the layout, but I have that at the bottom of the photo now as my title. And then I begin adding in the leaves, and I was really happy with the way the green looked on the layout. I thought that it was a nice combination with the yellow and the blue. I placed the leaves all around the outside edge of the wreath, but I also placed some on the inside edge of the wreath as well. In some areas, I have 2 leaves together, and in other areas, I just have a single leaf. I wanted to mix it up a little bit to make the layout look a little bit more interesting. I'm using a strip of the paper that I cut off of the background paper to punch out some photo corners. I love the way the paper has just a little bit of sheen to it. I use one of my favorite punches by EK Success to punch out those photo corners, and I ink the edges of them with Distress ink in Black Soot. I know not everybody is going to like photo corners. I think the reason I like them so much is because I can use them to tie the photo in with the rest of the layout. And now I kind of feel like my layouts are a little incomplete if I don't have photo corners on them. I'm adding some really, really tiny black enamel dots to all of the little flowers on the layout. They were really small, so sometimes I needed my scissors to help me position them. I did end up putting one on every single one of those little flowers. I realized I didn't have any adhesive on these 2 sentiments, so I'm adding some now. I attached down that sentiment that says "so much fun." I put it right on top of my photo. But then when I was looking through the items in the kit again, I found that there was a sentiment that says "blossoming," and I thought that that went much better with the layout. I thought that it made sense with the wreath of flowers, and it made sense for the ages of my girls, so I decided to use that one instead. And that is the very last touch. This layout is complete. Here are some close-ups. When you're placing an order with Shimmerz Paints, if you use my name in the comments, you'll receive a free gift from Shimmerz. In the description box, you'll find a link to the Shimmerz Paints website. You will also find a link to the April Color Kitz collection. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.